Hey everyone, how is everyone doing? Harun, I believe you, absolutely believe you. Thank you very much. So good to see you. I missed you in my previous streams, man. Good to see you. How have you been, Harun? How is your early weekend? Hello, hello, Ayahan. I hope the music is not too bad, Harun. Let me know if it's too loud or anything. Thank you for sharing the live, Ayahan. Alrighty, so today we're doing the chapter 4, which is all about the history of taxes and the power of corporations. We did touch on it yesterday a little bit. And the number one rule of investing, as I have mentioned multiple times, is do not lose money, which means the money that you earn is precious and you should make anything that's possible to keep as much of that money as possible. And the first thing basically that you spend money on is taxes. So let's see how it works. What is this about taxes? And how can we ethically reduce the amount that we spend on taxes? Alrighty. So my rich dad just played the game smart, and he did it through corporations, the biggest secret of the rich. Now, corporations here means companies or legal entities. Most of us, when we get paid, when we receive salary, we pay taxes because we are taxed as individuals. But the wealthy people, the rich people, they know that companies, which are legal entities, not people, not personal, not individuals, they are being taxed differently. So let's see what's the difference. I remember in school being told the story of Robin Hood and his merry men. My teacher thought it was a wonderful story of a romantic hero who robbed from the rich and gave to the poor. My rich dad did not see Robin Hood as a hero. He called Robin Hood a crook. Robin Hood may be long gone, but his followers live on. I often still hear people say, "Why don't the rich pay for it?" Or, "The rich should pay more in taxes and give it to the poor." It is this Robin Hood fantasy, or taking from the rich to give to the poor, that has caused the most pain for the poor and the middle class. The reason the middle class is so heavily taxed is because of the Robin Hood ideal. The reality is that the rich are not taxed. It's the middle class, especially the educated upper income middle class, who pays for the poor. Again, to understand fully how things happen, we need to look at the history of taxes. Although my highly educated dad was an expert on the history of education, my rich dad fashioned himself as an expert on the history of taxes. Rich dad explained to Mike and me that originally, in England and America, there were no taxes. Occasionally, there were temporary taxes levied on in order to pay for wars. The king or the president would put the word out and ask everyone to chip in. Taxes were levied in Britain for the fight against Napoleon from 1799 to 1816, and in America to pay for the Civil War from 1861 to 1865. In 1874, England made income tax a permanent levy on its citizens. In 1913, an income tax became permanent in the United States with the adoption of the 16th Amendment to the US Constitution. At one time, Americans were anti tax. It had been the tax on tea that led to the famous Tea Party in Boston Harbor, an incident that helped ignite the Revolutionary War. It took approximately 50 years in both England and the United States to sell the idea of a regular income tax. Alrighty, and our first goodie bag is opened, as well as our first treasure chest. Thank you for sharing the live, Ayahin. And please consider joining the fan club. Oh, Eren. Am I seeing it right? Is Eren here? Good to see you guys. So, as you can see, taxes were not a common thing not so long ago. And it took approximately 50 years in both England and the United States to sell the idea of a regular income tax. What these historical dates fail to reveal is that both of these taxes were initially levied against only the rich. It was this point that Rich Dad wanted Mike and me to understand. He explained that the idea of taxes was made popular and accepted by the majority by telling the poor and the middle class that taxes were created only to punish the rich. This is how the masses voted for the law and it became constitutionally legal. Although it was intended to punish the rich, in reality it wound up punishing the very people who voted for it, the poor and the middle class. Hey MK, Adamson, Ustaz Rinat, wow, good to see you. If that's the MK that I think it is, good to see you. Alrighty, once government got a taste of money, its appetite grew, said Rich Dad. Your dad and I are exactly opposite. He's a government bureaucrat and I'm a capitalist. We get paid and our success is measured on opposite behaviors. He gets paid to spend money and hire people. The more he spends and the more people he hires, the larger his organization becomes. In the government, a large organization is a respected organization. On the other hand, within my organization, the fewer people I hire and the less money I spend, the more I am respected by my investors. That's why I don't like government people. They have different objectives than most business people. As the government grows, more and more tax dollars are needed to support it. So here we can see how the government and the public organizations, schools, healthcare, Centerlink, they grow and grow and they need more and more money to support their operations. Thank you for the gifts, Eren. Thank you for the fast pop. Let me set up another treasure chest for you guys. Hey, MK, good to see you, man. We are streaming on multiple platforms, so I'm following multiple chats here. So, my educated dad sincerely believed that government should help people. He loved John Kennedy and especially the idea of the Peace Corps. He loved the idea so much that both he and my mom worked for the Peace Corps, training volunteers to go to Malaysia, Thailand, and the Philippines. He always strived for additional grants and budget increases so he could hire more people, both in his job with the education department and in the Peace Corps. My rich dad did not see Robin Hood as a hero. He called Robin Hood a crook. From the time I was about 10 years old, I would hear from my rich dad that government workers were a pack of lazy thieves. And from my poor dad, I would hear how the rich were greedy crooks who should be made to pay more taxes. Both sides had valid points. It was difficult to go to work for one of the biggest capitalists in town and come home to a father who was a prominent government leader. It was not easy to know which dad to believe. MK saying, let's catch up sometime about finance and life. No worries, no worries, anytime, brother. Oh, what? I have read only access, so I can't even reply to you. But I mean, I hope you hear me. Thank you, thank you. Alrighty, now, what has changed 20 years since the book was published? The rich are not taxed, and we touched on this yesterday. The rich will never be taxed. More and more often, we see governments use the tax laws to provide incentives to business owners and investors to create jobs and housing. These incentives reduce the taxes of the rich. So, the only place for the government to drive tax revenue is from the middle class. So, exactly the people who were for the introduction of taxes to make it fair ended up paying the most taxes. And like we just discussed yesterday, the rich, the wealthy people, they pay less tax and in most cases zero tax because they have access to more ways to save on tax. Let's see how can they make it happen. Yet, when you study the history of taxes, an interesting perspective emerges. As I said, the passage of taxes was only possible because the masses believed in the Robin Hood theory of economics. Take from the rich and give it to everyone else. The problem was that the government's appetite for money was so great that taxes soon needed to be levied on the middle class, and from there it kept trickling down. However, the rich saw an opportunity because they don't play by the same set of rules. The rich knew about corporations, which became popular in the days of sailing ships. The rich created the corporation as a vehicle to limit their risk to the assets of each voyage. The rich put their money into a corporation to finance the voyage. The corporation would then hire a crew to sail to the new world to look for treasure. If the ship was lost, the crew lost their lives, but the loss to the rich would be limited only to the money they invested for that particular voyage. It's interesting how the history evolved and how things have changed since then. But yes, originally the corporations were specifically for the voyages on the sea to limit the liability, which means when the expeditions failed, the rich were not responsible for anything other than they have already invested. Hey Bilal, welcome. Good to see you. Akjan is asking, were there any Jews that helped you gain financial success? Um, I have met a few Jewish people, yes, and in fact, I had one mentor which I volunteered for twice, I think, in total maybe 10 days, and I did learn a lot from him. So yeah, they didn't help me per se, but I did learn from them. And I'm sure this might be because of the recent uh, short video that I posted. But yeah, I think it is no secret that certain type of people um, basically rule the financial system, the economy, and they steer it the way they prefer. So it helps to know how they operate, how they think, and how they work. Alrighty, here's the diagram. The diagram that follows shows how the corporate structure sits outside your personal income statement and a balance sheet. Now, in the previous lessons, we saw the personal income statement and personal balance sheet, and we saw three different patterns, right? Hi, Nam. Welcome again. Welcome back. Now, here we see that the corporation, the company, has a separate income statement and separate balance sheet. So, what happens now is the expenses from the personal income statement go as expenses for the corporation. Let's see how this works. Now, this is becoming even more complex. It is the knowledge of the legal corporate structure that really gives the rich a vast advantage over the poor and the middle class. Having two fathers teaching me, one a socialist and the other a capitalist, I quickly began to realize that the philosophy of the capitalist made more financial sense to me. It seemed to me that the socialists ultimately penalized themselves due to their lack of financial education. No matter what the take from the rich crowd came up with, the rich always found a way to outsmart them. That is how taxes were eventually levied on the middle class. The rich outsmarted the intellectuals solely because they understood the power of money, a subject that is not taught in schools. That's why we are studying it here. I don't think that you will learn from the school on how to save on taxes. Instead, what they teach us is how to pay taxes, right? Not how to save. Alrighty. Oh, Zahid, welcome. Let's continue. And thank you for the gifts, guys. Thanks, Eren. Thanks, Zahid. Please make sure you tick off the daily fan club quests. And this reminds me, let me set up another treasure chest. Alrighty. How did the rich outsmart the intellectuals? Once the take from the rich tax was passed, cash started flowing into government coffers. Initially, people were happy. Money was handed out to government workers and the rich. It went to government workers in the form of jobs and pensions, and it went to the rich via their factories receiving government contracts. The government received a large pool of money, but the problem was the fiscal management of that money. The government ideal is to avoid having excess money. If you fail to spend your allotted funds, you risk losing it in the next budget. You would certainly not be recognized for being efficient. Business people, on the other hand, are rewarded for having excess money and are applauded for their efficiency. As this cycle of growing government spending continued, the demand for money increased and the tax the rich idea was adjusted to include lower income levels, down to the very people who voted it in, the poor and the middle class. Here it's really interesting to understand how the incentives work for different types of organizations. So, the public, the government organizations, they operate using budgets. And when you get a budget, they try to spend it and they try to get even more budgets for the next time. So this basically incentivizes more spending from the government, whereas the companies work on a different paradigm. The less they spend, the more efficient they are in their spending, the better they perform, and the more money they save, which is interesting. So the government is basically spending more and more money the more they spend, and the companies always favor the efficiency. There we go. True capitalists used their financial knowledge to simply find an escape. They headed back to the protection of a corporation. But what many people who have never formed a corporation don't know is that a corporation is not really a thing. A corporation is merely a file folder with some legal documents in it, sitting in some attorney's office and registered with a state government agency. It's not a big building or a factory or a group of people. A corporation or a company is merely a legal document that creates a legal body without a soul. Using it, the wealth of the rich was once again protected. It was popular because the income tax rate of a corporation is less than the individual income tax rates. In addition, certain expenses could be paid by a corporation with pre tax dollars. So, yes, having a company doesn't mean you need to have a building or people. Like, even for myself, I have two registered businesses in Australia and I am but a single person. Right? Interesting. Let's see. This war between the haves and have-nots has raged for hundreds of years. The battle is waged whenever and wherever laws are made, and it will go on forever. The problem is that the people who lose are the uninformed, the ones who get up every day and diligently go to work and pay taxes. If they only understood the way the rich play the game, they could play it too. Then they would be on their way to their own financial independence. This is why I cringe every time I hear a parent advise their children to go to school so they can find a safe, secure job. An employee with a safe, secure job without financial aptitude has no escape. That's it. So, um, honestly, I would probably highlight all of this because unless you have this understanding of how money works, how finance works, how investment works, how taxes work, how companies work, you honestly have no chance of escape. And that's what it says here. Without the financial aptitude, you have no escape. So, all of these talks about escaping the matrix or making it out, you have no chance if you do not have the understanding of the taxes, the finance, the economy, and your chances of financial independence are literally going to zero. Escape the matrix. Yes, you're right, Nam. That's exactly what we're trying to do here. This is what I am aiming to achieve with these simple bedtime stories. Average Americans today work 4 to 5 months for the government just to cover their taxes. And the same is true for Australians. 30% is the average tax rate, which means out of 12 months, almost 3.5 months, you're just working to pay your taxes. And then another 3, 4 months, you're just working to pay off your mortgage or your rental payments. So, what's left? In my opinion, that is simply too long. The harder you work, the more you pay the government. That is why I believe that the idea of take from the rich backfired on the very people who voted it in. Every time people try to punish the rich don't simply comply, they react. In fact, they anticipate. They have the money, power, and intent to change things. They don't just sit there and voluntarily pay more taxes. Instead, they search for ways to minimize their tax burden. They hire smart attorneys and accountants and persuade politicians to change laws or create legal loopholes. They use their resources to effect change. The tax code of the United States also allows other ways to reduce taxes. Most of these vehicles are available to anyone, but it is the rich who find them because they are minding their own business. For example, 1031 is jargon for Section 1031 of the Internal Revenue Code, which allows a seller to delay paying taxes on a piece of real estate that is sold for a capital gain through an exchange for a more expensive piece of real estate. The other day, someone posted on Reddit how to legally in Australia get $6 million tax free. And when I saw that, I was shocked, and I just forwarded the um conversation to my accountant and asked him, like, is this really possible? Is it even real? And he said, yes, it is real. You obviously need to make sure that certain things are taken care of and followed, but it is absolutely possible to get $6 million of income in Australia tax free. So, how does that make you feel? Real estate is one investment vehicle that has a great tax advantage. As long as you keep trading up in value, you will not be taxed on the gains until you liquidate. People who don't take advantage of these legal tax savings are missing a great opportunity to build their asset columns. Now, how is the situation these days? The taxman. The taxman will take as much as you let him. The tax system is ultimately fair in that it works the same for everyone who has the same situation. If you're willing to invest, the tax laws will work in your favor. If you want to just spend money and buy liabilities, the tax law won't give you any breaks, and it's likely you will pay the most tax possible. The poor and middle class don't have the same resources. They sit there and let the government's needles enter their arm and allow the blood donation to begin. Today, I am constantly shocked at the number of people who pay more taxes or take fewer deductions simply because they are afraid of the government. I have friends who have had their businesses shut down and destroyed only to find out it was a mistake on the part of the government. I realize all that, but the price of working from January to May is a high price to pay for that intimidation. My poor dad never fought back. My rich dad didn't either. He just played the game smarter as he did it through corporations, the biggest secret of the rich. If you work for money, you give the power to your employer. If money works for you, you keep the power and control it. So here's the power. We actually discussed power today in class with Unines. Oh, Yasin, welcome, welcome. How are you? Good to see you. Good to see you. How is life? Raihan, thank you for the gift. Thank you for the heart me. Yes, Nam, you're right. The brief summary of this text story is the harder you work, the more you get taxed. That's why I call this whole thing the modern tax slavery. They just keep you comfortable enough so that you don't revolt, and they take everything else. And it is no different than the slavery we had in the medieval times, where the slaves were just basically given enough to sustain them, enough so that they don't revolt and they just worked their whole life for the landlord, for the owner of the land. That's it. And it is exactly the same in the modern time and age. The only difference is we have better houses, we have better food, we have cars, we have more freedom, which we think is freedom, but then you still have to show up to work every day, 9 to 5. You still have to pay taxes every time you receive your paycheck. And God forbid you do something with your taxes which is not right, you will be penalized a lot. That's it. That's the sad story of the modern tax slavery. In fact, recently one of the guys on the X platform on Twitter, basically, he he posted like, write a sad story in 3 words, and that was my reply. Modern tax slavery is the saddest story that is being carried on and on and on from generation to generation. People just keep following the same thing: study hard, get a job, pay taxes, die paying off your mortgage. And that's your average life of the modern tax slave. So, this is exactly why I'm doing my best to help you guys understand the difference between the wealthy mindset and the poor mindset. The mindset of the wealthy and the rich, and the mindset of the modern tax slave. And I hope it is valuable, and I hope you will have a chance at a different type of life. That's what we're here for. It's been half an hour. I think we have read enough for tonight. I'm just gonna see if you guys have any questions. And we have a treasure chest which is gonna open in a minute and a half. Nam, thank you very much. No, I did not eat yet. And actually, I want to sleep so much. And tomorrow I have a long and big day. I'm going into a 6-day seminar to continue my learning. I'm still learning at every opportunity I can. Yes, I will, Nam. As soon as we finish this live stream, I will go and have a meal. Thank you. Alrighty. So, no questions. All good. Taxman bad. And there are actually a lot of legal and ethical ways to avoid paying tax. But unfortunately, the only way most people know how to avoid taxes is to avoid showing income, which leads to dealing in cash. But there are so many legal ways. Like, even for myself, I have an investment property which I am allowed to use for tax deductions. And of course, most of you have heard about negative gearing, which means how does tax fraud work? No, tax fraud doesn't work, my friend. No, tax fraud is illegal, is dangerous, and especially as a Muslim, tax fraud is actually the responsibility that you don't want to have on yourself. So, like I said, there are legal ways to pay less tax, and you just need to learn them. You just need to know how to reduce your taxes. And it's called tax planning. It's not tax fraud. It's not avoiding tax. It's just planning your business structure, planning your income and expenses accordingly to reduce the amount of tax you pay. That's why actually at the end of the tax year, and if you know, the tax year in Australia goes from the 1st of July to the 30th of June. That's why at the end of the financial year, end of June, you will see a lot of these end of financial year deals. Why? Because companies get taxed only on the amount of money that they did not spend on growing the business or operating the business. So compare this interesting fact. The poor and the middle class, they get taxed before they even see the money coming in. So when you get paid from your job, the taxes get deducted from your payslip before the money even hits your account. And then at the end of the financial year, you go back to the ATO and say, oh, I had spent this, and can I please have my tax deductions? That's what they call tax deductions. But the companies, on the other hand, they get paid by their clients, so they get their revenue, they have their income, and then they are allowed to spend that money to grow the business, to hire more people, to pay the people, to improve their business, to teach their people, to buy supplies, and only whatever they cannot spend is their profit, and they're only taxed on their profit. And mind you, the tax rate of companies or legal entities is actually officially less than the tax rate of most individuals, especially the middle class and high earning, high income individuals. So that's it. Not only they are taxed only on the amount of money that they could not spend, but they are also getting taxed at a lower rate than an individual. There you go. Tell me how fair that is. But that is the sad reality of taxes and the sad reality of the modern tax slavery. Alrighty, guys. I see there are no questions other than people asking if I'm hungry. And thank you very much. Thank you for all the gifts. Ala just sent a heart me, Raihan, Zahid, Eren. Thank you, guys. And you made me chuckle. Yes, thank you very much. Have a good night, guys. See you again tomorrow. Bye.